Good evening, I'm David Kramer here with your Alaska weather. As always, please visit our website at weather.gov/Alaska. You can get any updates to the forecast if that means, or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we may have out for your area. You can also call our weather info line 1-800-472-0391. Get any updates to the forecast if that means as well. And you can email us at the address at the bottom of the screen. Starting off, we'll take a quick look at a couple advisories that we have out for the state. Out over the Yukon Flats area and surrounding areas, we do have a dense smoke advisory out that will be in effect until noon on Wednesday. And then down in the Delta Junction area, surrounding areas there as well, we do have another dense smoke advisory out that is also out until noon on Wednesday. Taking a look now at our fire danger, we do have several areas of high fire danger all around the Cook Inlet area, up in the interior part of the state, down by Northway. However, in the Copper River Basin and up in the southern parts of the Yukon Flats, we are starting to see some areas of extreme fire danger. As we take a look at our satellite imagery, we'll see over much of the state, we start off with some clearing, but we are going to see some cloud cover come back into the area, especially in the afternoon hours, as we are seeing some convection form, especially along the mountains. And we have a wave coming in from the east that we'll see moving in over the south central part of the state that's bringing a lot of thunderstorm activity to areas of the Talkeetna Mountains and a lot of surrounding areas as well in western Copper River Basin around the Susitna Valley as well. Down in the southeastern part of the state, we have a low spinning to the south that's bringing some rain to the southern locations of the Panhandle, but also some areas of thunderstorms in the outside waters but near the coast from Sitka area further to the north. That does include areas such as Icy Strait, northern Chatham Strait, and southern Lynn Canal. As we take a look further out to the west, we will see an area of low pressure further to the north that has troughing down through much of the central part of the Bering Sea, bringing some rain to areas such as the Pribilof Islands and down into areas around the eastern Aleutian Islands, with some more rain expected out further to the west. So as we look at our rain for the remainder of the day, we do have that rain mixed with fog from much of the Aleutian Islands area and up into the Bering Sea as well. And we will have some fog extending out further to the east towards the Bristol Bay area. Up along the west coast of the state, we are going to see some areas of rain all around the Norton Sound area. And then as we move up along the coastline, continue to see those rain showers up there. Along the Arctic coastline, expecting to see fog, especially as we get out over the water. As we move down into the Brooks Range, we will see some showers forming over the mountains, and we will have continued smoke problems in the interior part of the state, extending up into the Yukon Flats area. As we drop down to south central Alaska, as we saw in satellite imagery, we are seeing some thunderstorms forming, especially over the Talkeetna Mountains, expecting some of those to continue to push off further to the west, making it into the Alaska Range as well. And then as we move into the Prince William Sound area, expecting to see some showers there. Out by the Panhandle area, as we mentioned earlier, we do have some thunderstorms in northern portions of the outside waters, extending north of Sitka area. We do have some shower activity in the remainder of the Panhandle area, especially as we get further to the south with our low pressure system moving into the area. As we look into tonight, another low out over the eastern part of the Gulf can extend in, bring some more rain to areas of the southern portions of the Panhandle, but we will have some continued lingering showers up further to the north as well. We will have our trough that made the thunderstorms over the south central area pushing further off to the west, but leaving behind it some lingering showers, especially in the evening hours, but continuing through the night for many locations as well, especially as we get up into the Alaska Range. As we move into the interior part of the state, some of the southern portions still expecting to see some rain, but as we push further to the north, we will just see a lot of areas of smoke extending to western portions of the interior and all the way out towards the Yukon Flats area. As we mentioned, we do have that dense smoke advisory out until noon on Wednesday for the Yukon Flats area. Up along the Arctic coastline, we will see fog from Katovik all the way out to Utqiagvik, but as we get further to the west, we will start to see some rain along the coastline, extending down through the Kotzebue Sound area, down into the St. Lawrence Island area as well, and the coastal locations along the YK Delta. And as we move over much of the remainder of the Bering Sea and into the Aleutian Islands and Alaska Peninsula, we are expecting to see a lot of that rain mixed with fog for those locations. We do have our system pushing in from the west, bringing a little bit heavier rain, but not impacting any of our land locations at this time. As we look out into Wednesday, that low is going to push out further to the east, now bringing more rain to areas of the Pribilof Islands. Behind it, we are going to see more rain and fog for the western and central Aleutian Islands. That's going to extend further to the east as well as we get into the Alaska Peninsula, expecting to see some rain and fog mixture there as well. Along the west coast of the state, we do have our trough pushing in. That's going to bring a little bit heavier rain to areas along the YK Delta up into the Norton Sound area and the western portions of the Seward Peninsula. Then as we push a little bit further inland, we will start to see some thunderstorm activity in the western parts of the Brooks Range, extending out to the eastern parts of the Brooks Range as well, especially Wednesday afternoon and evening time frame. Further to the north, a little bit more stable, going to see fog along the coastline of the Arctic coast through most of the day on Wednesday. And as we drop more into the interior, we're going to see more of that smoke develop, especially in the more low-lying areas of the interior, and then in the Yukon Flats area and down by Delta Junction as well. Then as we move down into the south central part of the state, we're going to see showers throughout much of the area, including areas further out towards the Alaska Range and then all the way to the east for the Copper River Basin. As we move along the North Gulf Coast, more showers are expected through the Panhandle as well, and another system coming up from the south bringing more rain to the area, not impacting too much of the southeast part of the state on Wednesday. However, as we move into Thursday, you can see this low has pushed up further to the north, further into the eastern part of the Gulf, bringing a heavier rain to much of the Panhandle area until we get up a little bit closer towards Yakutat, where it'll be a little bit more intermittent with those showers. And as we move along the North Gulf Coast, we'll have some rain all the way around the Prince William Sound area down into the Kenai Peninsula with some shower activity as we get past the coastal ranges up into the Alaska Range and places around the Susitna Valley. As we move into the interior, expecting showers to continue up there as well, and with areas around the Yukon Flats expecting to see afternoon thunderstorms, and that's going to extend into eastern portions of the Brooks Range as well. As we move over to the west coast of the state, we are going to see some rain all the way down the west coast from the Kotzebue Sound area down through the Bristol Bay area, and we will have some more showers as we move out over the Alaska Peninsula. Further out to the west, a little reprieve from some of the heavier rain, but we will have some isolated areas of rain near the Aleutian Islands that may sneak in at times on Thursday. Taking a look now at our temperatures, looking for our minimum temperatures for tonight into Wednesday morning. We do have temperatures dropping into the mid to upper 40s for some of the Aleutian Islands, down to the lower 50s for the Alaska Peninsula. That's going to continue into the Bristol Bay area and the YK Delta area, with Macquarie getting a little bit lower there, down to 48 degrees. It's going to be the same for Gamble, dropping down to 48 as well. And those lower 40s through along much of the west coast, through the Seward Peninsula and up towards the Point Hope area. As we look along the Arctic coastline, warmest as we are out to the west, but as we move to the east, it's going to drop down with Dead Horse and Kaktovik dropping down to 44 degrees for Wednesday morning. As we look into the interior part of the state, we are seeing temperatures drop down into the mid-50s, with some places, especially further off to the east, staying at 60 or a little bit higher, with Fort Yukon area only dropping down to 61 degrees for a minimum temperature for tonight. As we move down into the south central part of the state, dropping down into the 50s for most locations, staying a little bit warmer in some of the more westerly locations, Anchorage and Talkeetna only dropping down to 57 degrees. But along the North Gulf Coast, dropping down to right around 50 degrees. And then as we move into the Panhandle area, we will see temperatures dropping into the lower to mid 50s. For our highs for Wednesday afternoon, getting up into the lower 60s for much of the Panhandle area. And that's going to be true along the North Gulf Coast as well. However, as we get past the coastal ranges, getting a little bit warmer, getting into the mid 60s there. And then we are expecting Glen Allen to get up to 71 degrees for tomorrow. Warmest in the state, however, is going to be Fort Yukon, jumping up to 82 degrees for an afternoon high Wednesday afternoon, and staying up just below or at 80 degrees for many locations throughout the interior, with Galena a little bit cooler there, 73 degrees expected for the high. Along the Arctic coastline, only getting up into the 50s for most locations, and as we drop down the Arctic coastline, that's going to be true as well. However, Kotzebue, a little bit of an outlier there, getting up to 70 degrees, but places right along the coastline only get up into the mid to upper 50s, some places getting into the 60s, and then in the mid 60s for the Bristol Bay area, and only in the 50s for many of the Aleutian Islands. Thursday morning, dropping down into the mid-40s for the Aleutian Islands and Pribilofs, dropping down into the lower 50s for many locations of the Bristol Bay Area and all along the coastline up to the Point Lay, Point Hope areas. Along the Arctic coastline, dropping down into the mid-40s. And as we go into the interior part of the state, mid-50s for most locations. However, again, Fort Yukon only dropping down to 60 degrees for a low Thursday morning. Down into the 50s for most locations throughout the South Central and for the Panhandle Thursday morning. For highs on Thursday, up into the lower 60s for the Panhandle and along the coastline. Mid-60s for South Central Alaska, getting up into the 70s for most locations in the interior and into the upper 50s to lower 60s along the Arctic coastline. Down the west coast of the state, getting up into the 50s for most locations. That's going to extend into the Panhandle as well, and only around 50 for the Aleutian Islands. We'll be back with the aviation forecast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off looking at our flying weather. Wednesday morning, we have widespread IFR conditions out throughout the Bering Sea and much of the Aleutian Islands, extending towards the west coast of the state, including the YK Delta area and areas up by the Bering Strait. As we move over mainland Alaska, we have some areas of MVFR off the coast by AKwx, and then down in the interior part of the state, we still have a lot of smoke that's going to remain well through Thursday, and down around the Kenai Peninsula as well with the Swan Lake fire down there. MVFR conditions for much of south central Alaska, and then some IFR conditions mixed in as we get into the Gulf, and MVFR conditions down in the Panhandle. As we move into Wednesday afternoon, that's going to be pretty true still for the Panhandle area, going to be in MVFR conditions, and remain in MVFR conditions for much of south central Alaska as well. And as we get further into the interior, especially northern areas of the interior, expecting some thunderstorm activity out there. Down the west coast of the state, IFR conditions remaining along the west coast for the Seward Peninsula, down into the YK Delta, and starting to make their way closer towards the Bristol Bay area, and widespread IFR conditions through the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. As we move into Thursday morning, pretty similar conditions throughout the Bering and Aleutians, with our IFR and MVFR conditions pushing further inland for southwest Alaska. As we move up along the Arctic coast, or the west coast of the state into the western parts of the Brooks Range, expecting some MVFR and IFR conditions there. And then south central Alaska will see a lot more IFR conditions Thursday morning, whereas the Panhandle will still be in primarily the MVFR conditions. Let's move into Thursday afternoon. MVFR conditions remaining for the Panhandle and south central Alaska, southern portions of the interior as well, but as we get further to the north, VFR conditions expected. And then along the west coast, we do have some MVFR conditions showing up all the way around Norton Sound area, down into YK Delta and Bristol Bay area, and some places of the lower Kuskokwim Valley. Then out over the Bering Sea as we get further to the west, more IFR conditions expected out there and by the western Aleutian Islands. As we look at our passes, starting off up north at AKwx Pass, we're going to expect VFR conditions for Wednesday as well as Adigan Pass. However, as we drop further to the south, Lake Clark and Merrill both expected to be IFR on Wednesday. So get up towards Rainy Pass, MVFR conditions expected, and those marginal conditions expected at Windy Pass as well. As we start moving to the east, Isabel Pass should be in VFR conditions, as well as Mintasta Pass. And then as we drop down towards Tanita Pass, IFR conditions expected to improve to marginal conditions in the afternoon hours. Then as we move down towards Portage, IFR conditions also expecting to improve to marginal conditions in the afternoon. As we look out towards Chilkoot and White, MVFR conditions expected throughout the day on Wednesday. Taking a look at our freezing levels, starting off over the Panhandle area, about 8,000 feet there. Getting up as we get a little bit further to the north for much of mainland Alaska, expecting around 10,000 feet. And then as we push off further to the west, colder up to the north where we have 6,000 feet over parts of the northern Bering, getting to 10 to 12,000 feet as we get over the Aleutian Islands. Taking a look at our icing, starting off by the western Aleutians, between 6,000 and 10,000 feet there. It's going to be the same by the eastern Aleutian Islands as well. As we get closer towards south central area, we are going to see above 10,000 feet there. And then along the North Gulf Coast, between 6,000 and 10,000 feet expected. So you look at our jet stream, starting off again in the Panhandle area, we have a low pressure system out in the eastern part of the Gulf with an 80-knot jet circulating around that low, which gives us southeasterly winds over the Panhandle area. And as we look along the west coast of the state, we have a 130-knot jet out of the westerly direction to the south of our low in the southern Bering Sea, dropping down to 85 knots as we move through the Bering Strait area and then off into the Arctic Ocean. As we look down to 9,000 feet on Wednesday, our strongest winds to just to the north of the Aleutian Islands, 60 to 65 knots there, that 9,000 foot range, and then moving up along the west coast of the state, southerly direction, as strong as 40 knots there by the Bering Strait area, getting a little bit weaker as we get towards our low and as we get further towards the Alaska Peninsula. Out over mainland Alaska, we have southeasterly flow around 15 knots, getting as high as 25 knots as we get closer towards the Brooks Range, and southeasterly flow around 20 knots over the Panhandle area. Dropping down to 3,000 feet, 15 to 20 knots by the Panhandle area, dropping down 10 to 15 knots over the main part of the state, and increasing once again as we get up towards the Brooks Range, around 20 knots there. Strongest winds still just north of the Aleutian Islands out of a westerly direction, 35 to 40 knots there, dropping down 20 to 25 as we get further towards the northern part of the Bering Sea and as we drop towards the western coast of the state. As we look at our turbulence, not a lot to speak of for mainland Alaska until we get right along the northwestern part of the coastline, Tin City area up towards Point Hope below 4,000 feet there, and central and western Aleutians below 4,000 feet expected there, a little bit stronger than the places along the west coast. We'll be back shortly with the marine forecast.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, joined again by Eric Stevens from the GINA, or Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Thanks for joining us again, Eric.
Glad to be here.
Thanks. We are talking about satellites today, and what are satellites? And the easy way to talk about that would be to introduce our friend the globe here, which is a round spheroid type shape. We haven't been on a flat Earth as far as history is known for several hundred years now, and because of that we also know that we are orbiting around other objects in space and that objects are orbiting around the Earth as well. We call all those things satellites in some form or fashion, right, Eric?
Right. Well, this leads to the discussion of Johannes Kepler's research 400 years ago. Did some of the early work and founded the 3 laws of planetary motion, which are important to planets and also to weather satellites.
Okay.
Kepler's first law talks about how the orbit of an object around another object is an ellipse, not necessarily a circle.
Kind of a flattened circle?
Yeah, depending on how flat
squished
it could be.
Okay.
For our purposes, we'll just say they're mostly circular.
Okay.
The second law is most important for us, though,
Yeah.
and that is the closer an object is to the thing it's orbiting, the faster it goes. So in the solar system, the planet Mercury is the closest planet to the sun. It orbits the sun in 88 days. It moves at 100,000 kilometers an hour.
It's a lot different than Earth.
Moving.
Okay.
Right. And further out from the Earth is Jupiter, and it moves at only 1/4 the speed of Mercury, and it has to go further, so it takes 12 of our years for Jupiter to make one lap. The further out you are, the slower you go.
Okay.
So we're talking about planets. What does it have to do with weather satellites? Turns out Kepler's laws apply to planets orbiting the sun. They also apply to satellites orbiting the Earth.
Okay.
You know, our natural satellite is the moon. There's the famous Apollo 8 Earthrise shot.
Beautiful shot.
Oh, yeah, you could just talk about that forever. December 1968, the moon is about 250,000 miles away from the Earth.
Okay.
Takes a month to go around the Earth. It's that far out, it takes a full month to do an orbit. Another shot here of the International Space Station. Instead of being 250,000 miles out, the ISS is only 250 miles up. It's really close. And so it doesn't take a full month for the space station to go around the Earth. It only takes 90 minutes. It's so close, it just whips right around 90 minutes.
Okay.
So weather satellites, there are a number of weather satellites and there are a number of orbits. The further out you have the satellite, the longer it takes to go around the Earth. And this is important because different satellites have different purposes. So we have a satellite here. This little salt shaker lid will serve as our satellite going around the Earth. Let's say you have a satellite that's 22,000 miles above the Earth. This is kind of a magical spot because at that distance, it takes a full day for the satellite to go around the Earth. Imagine if you put your satellite 22,000 miles up from the equator and had it go with the Earth as the Earth spun.
At the same speed.
Right.
Okay.
The satellite goes around the Earth just as fast as the Earth itself is turning. In effect, the satellite will hover in one spot.
I see.
And it appears when you make a movie loop of picture after picture after picture, you can replay that and you get these movie loops. Geostationary satellites, these are called, because they're stationary in appearance. And they provide a constant frame of reference. We've got an example here. Another nice thing about these satellites, since they're that far out at 22,000 miles, you can see from pole to pole, which is nice. So they're pretty broad view and a constant frame of reference.
So those are the pictures. If you're watching a weather satellite loop on TV, your favorite weather show, that's the picture that you're going to see is one that's sitting over the same spot.
If you're seeing a movie loop play again and again, that came from geostationary satellites. That's the only way you can do that.
Yeah.
The bummer, though, for us in Alaska is
Yeah.
we're up on the very top of the planet. And for geostationary satellites to work, they have to be over the equator. So for the geostationary bird to view Alaska, it's kind of like reading a book, but you're reading it edge on like that.
Right.
So there's another kind of orbit called the polar orbit,
Okay.
which is nice. We're near the pole.
Yeah.
And here's a satellite. Those polar orbiters are much closer to the Earth, getting down toward International Space Station elevation. And they're not in the equatorial plane. Rather, their orbital plane is inclined like this. And the Earth turns under that satellite as the satellite orbits. The nice thing about that is for Alaska, the satellite will go right over Alaska a few times a day. And so you get a much closer image. We've got a shot from the Sumi NPP satellite. Specifically, it's a true color image from the VIRS sensor. That's an acronym there.
Okay.
But it's a beautiful shot of Alaska, and you can see so much detail, the kind of detail because you're close in.
Very high resolution.
You couldn't get this kind of view from geostationary satellites. The advantage of these polar orbiters is nice close imagery. You can see a lot of detail. The disadvantage, though, is that the satellite flies by,
Right.
and then you have to wait a while to get the next image. And if geostationary weaknesses are that you're reading the page like that, the polar orbiter, you're reading the page straight on, but it's so close, and then it zips by, and you have to wait for the satellite to come around the Earth again. So there's no one perfect solution. Different satellites for different orbits, each has their strength, and amazingly, it all comes back to Johannes Kepler and his laws of planetary motion, the same laws that govern how the planets orbit the sun. They govern how the satellites orbit the Earth, and even our little pretend salt shaker right here.
Right. Okay. Well, since the 1957 Sputnik, we've been putting man-made objects into orbit around the Earth and starting to get pictures back. Who knows what will happen in the next 50 to 100 years? Amazing
it's
stuff.
a growing science, and the future is bright.
Thank you so much for joining us again, Eric. And for more information on Gina and what the satellite systems do there and what Eric's been talking about today, you can go to the web address on your screen. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
For our Marines, we will start off looking at the ice edge. Note a lot of clearing out to the west, and we will see with continued southerly winds some of that ice pushing even further to the north as we move throughout time. We have a patch of ice just here north of Prudhoe Bay that is expected to continue to melt over the next couple days. And actually some of the ice out further to the east, east of Kaktovik, we are expecting some easterly winds that are going to continue to push this a little bit further to the west. As we look out over the remainder of the marine forecast, starting off in southeastern part of the state on Wednesday, we do have primarily southeasterly winds around 10 to 15 knots, a little bit stronger out in the outside waters, getting up to as high as 20 knots. And it is worth noting that there's a special marine warning out for the outside waters just north of Sitka, kind of along the coastline here. That does include areas of Icy Strait, northern Chatham Strait, and southern Lynn Canal. So if you're in those areas, please watch out for thunderstorms this afternoon and evening. As we move into Thursday, flow is going to switch up a little bit, become a little bit more easterly, and we're going to have more 20-knot winds out over the outside waters. Inside waters, primarily a southeasterly run around 15 knots, but as we get closer to Juneau, northeasterly around 10 knots there. On Wednesday for south central Alaska, pretty light winds out over much of the northern part of the Gulf around 10 knots. But as we get into the Cook Inlet area, we are going to see southerly winds 15 to 20 knots there with seas as high as 6 feet. Then on Thursday, those winds dropping down a little bit, but remaining out of the south, dropping down to around 10 to 15 knots for the Cook Inlet area. And then winds out over the northern part of the Gulf, light winds still around 10 knots out of a southerly direction. For areas along the Alaska Peninsula near Kodiak Island, southwesterly winds for the most part, we're seeing winds around 10 to 15 knots there, with seas only getting up to as high as around 5 feet. Then on Thursday, things picking up a little bit, some stronger winds coming in from the west. Southwesterly winds around 15 to 20 knots, with seas now getting up to as high as 7 feet as we get further off to the west. For the Aleutian Islands, we will have winds on Wednesday out of a southwesterly direction, 20 to 25 knots for the most part, staying around that 25 knot range as we get further off to the west as well. Seas around 7 feet there. Then on Thursday, dropping down for the western Aleutians, westerly winds 10 to 15 knots expected, and 15 to 20 knots as we get closer towards the eastern Aleutians. Seas only around 7 feet. So you look along the west coast of the state, southerly flow for the most part, around 15 to 20 knots for all locations along the west coast down into the Pribilof Islands as well. And as we move into Thursday, getting a little bit stronger and switching to become a little bit more westerly, around 25 knots, with seas as high as 8 feet as we get closer towards the Pribilof Islands. Along the Arctic coastline and northwestern part of the state, starting off the northwest, we're going to see southerly winds 15 to 20 knots, becoming easterly as we get along the Arctic coastline, around 25 knots expected there. Then on Thursday, remaining out of that easterly direction along the Arctic coastline, strongest further off to the east, around 30 knots expected, with seas as high as 11 feet. As we get over the west coast of the state, however, becoming more southerly, around 20 knots, with seas only as high as around 5 feet. Taking a quick recap of the state, out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands tonight, we're expecting widespread rain and fog extending out all the way to the east towards the Bristol Bay area, and some of that rain and fog making it just along the coastline of the YK Delta area. As we move out over mainland Alaska, we'll have some fog up along the Arctic coastline, but as we drop down into the interior Yukon Flats areas, we will see continued dense smoke in those areas, and we do have dense smoke advisory out for the Yukon Flats area and down by Delta Junction as well. Those are both into effect until noon on Wednesday. Then as we drop down further into the Alaska Range and into the south central part of the state, we're going to see more showers expected with rain, especially in those more western locations, getting into the western parts of the Alaska Range. And we do have some thunderstorms lingering in the evening hours as we are around the Talkeetna Mountains, into the Susitna Valley, and out by the Alaska Range as well. As we drop down into the southeastern part of the state, we do have some rain coming in from the south, with some showers extending up throughout areas all around southeastern Alaska. As we move into Wednesday, we are going to have continued rain there, with a new system coming up from the south, bringing more rain to those southern portions of southeast Alaska. Rain all along the North Gulf Coast, and some more rain as we move into interior parts of south central Alaska. As we get up into the Brooks Range, we are expecting some thunderstorms to develop in the afternoon hours. That's going to extend up to areas of the eastern Brooks Range as well, with some areas of smoke still expected in the Yukon Flats area, as well as down by the Delta Junction area, especially in those morning hours. Along the Arctic coastline, expecting to have fog much of the day, and then we're going to have rain all the way along the west coast, and rain and fog throughout the Aleutian Islands and into the Bering Sea, with some reinforcement of rain out over the Pribilof Islands as this system moves in from the west. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.